The first time I ever encountered orcs as a player was actually a couple of years ago. Orcs were never a bad race. In fact, half orcs weren't even played. We just never encountered orcs. It was never a thing. A couple of years ago, orcs raided a village. We were cattle for orcs, and they were using us as food. But they weren't barbaric, and they were able to be communicated with. But they thought we, humans, elves, dwarves, were simply like we treat cattle. It was a very interesting concept. But it was because the dungeon master looked at the stat block of the orc and realized something. They were statted to not be hard to hit, but beefy brutes that were aggressive. And it's in the stat block. And so he used those things. The dungeon master changed the way that I used orcs forever when they're not a playable character race, or if they are just simply a bad guy. But if you're going to use orcs to kill your bad guys, we'll kill your bad guys. If you're going to use orcs to kill your players, let's talk tactically how you do that and make for an interesting encounter. As a dungeon master, the first thing we have to do when using an orc as a stat block, as a bad guy, there are three things. They're not hard to hit. They only have a 13 AC, but they have decent hit points at 14. Those two things right there tell you that they're more of a meat shield than you'd find a goblin, but they're easier to hit than a goblin, which is nice. Now, on top of that, they do have a pretty decent hit, so you definitely don't want to throw a band of orcs up against a low-level party. But they have a stat, a trait, aggressive. As a bonus action, they can move their distance to a party member, which means that they could move a bonus action, and then they can move their full action, just like a dash, or they can, as a bonus action, move the 30 feet and then attack on that round. It's one of the few creatures that can move and attack their full length as they are. And so that aggressive feature means they're going to close distance to everyone in your party quickly, including your range and including your casters, which changes the dynamics of a fight. As a dungeon master, if you're using orcs in your campaign and your party is creating a counter of orcs, use a warband. Basically, orcs travel in warbands in large parties to overwhelm force for raids. That's one idea for orcs. Doesn't have to be the only idea, but by doing that allows the party then to have a singular focus. It's not all orcs, it's this warband. And so therefore, the players have a finite amount of orcs they have to kill, a finite group that's usually out raiding that doesn't have women and children, so you can remove that moral dilemma. But that also makes them highly aggressive, meaning the blacksmith shop that you've frequented often may not look the same when you come back to town and a warband has hit it. It also means that the orcs are tactical, attacking for a reason, for resources, for food, all of those things. So just keep that in mind when using orcs. That warband keeps them together, makes them much more formidable than a small party of orcs. Gives the players something to fear, something to move around, but at the same time, they don't move fast unless they're attacking. The warband moves slowly from location to location, and that warband then allows the party, that warband can be moving throughout the area. It can be a constant threat, big enough where the party never goes near them. They know they need to stay away. The orcs always raid just enough to keep themselves survive, but without killing everything. Just like as humans, we would never completely kill all of our cattle, because then they can't breed more. What if orcs treated us the same? And those war bands went from place to place, scaring the living daylights out of anyone that was nearby. Food for thought. Now, if you're a dungeon master and you're using orcs in your campaign as the bad guy, we have to talk about how tactically to use orcs. Flanking. Orcs are strategically good at what they do. They are fighters. They are warriors. The thing is they can move quickly by using their ability to be aggressive, meaning moving 30 feet and then attacking, which means flanking is going to be a thing. They will come at the party, they will come at the town one direction, and then come in from the side. I don't know if I would do piercing attacks, but I definitely would do a distractive force, and then the main force comes in the side, or the main force puts up a front, and then they come in from behind or from the back. Utilize flanking in your orcs makes them very effective. Make them ride wargs, make them ride dire wolves, and now you have something truly horrifying. Now, the thing is this can be a great encounter that's not completely overwhelming for the party if the party's entire job maybe is to handle those dire wolves. They've only got 4 that are coming in, but they're terrifying. The village has heard that what happens is the orcs will come out, they'll get everyone riled up, then they'll charge in, making the defensive force, and the warg riders will come in, the dire wolf riders will come in from the side. The player's job is not to fight this war, but to deal with the assault force, the special forces force. It also allows for giant battles to occur and the parties to have one area to focus on. It's great tactically for the orcs, and it's fun for the encounter. So food for thought when you're trying to kill your party with orcs. Also, when you're using orcs to kill your party, brute force is a thing. They're not going to pick the luck. They're going to break it down. They're going to attack everything with brute force in this one version of orcs. Remember, you can always change your version of orcs, but brute force can be fun when it's over the top. Breaking down doors, breaking down walls, using catapults, commandeering a Trent, harnessing it with magical powers, having a warlock that's an orc contort things magically. I'm not withdrawing from any popular media, all on that one. Remember, even when using magic, lean towards brute force. Thematically, it's a lot of fun. And for players, it can show them what they're up against from a purely thematic standpoint. The players may be an even match for those orcs coming in, but to know how powerful and how strong and how aggressive those orcs are and telegraphing it makes the players respond differently. When a player thinks someone is going to be tactical, they're going to affect a certain way. They're going to think a certain way. If the players think of the orcs as purely brute force, when you show an aspect of their cunning, it can be surprising, catching your players slightly off guard, but making for an amazing encounter. Another way to kill your players with orcs: telegraph the brute force, then come in with a little tactics on the side. Also, to kill your players with orcs, think about using fear and intimidation. Maybe the orcs want something. The orcs could use fear and intimidation on the local force to force them to give something. Maybe the orcs aren't the bad guys after all, but they utilize the fear and intimidation of their warband to be given things. Understanding that if they just wipe people out, that the resources they're after will no longer be available. Maybe by using fear and intimidation, you can actually, the players might think of, hey, we are outnumbered. We need to actually come up with a truce. Finding out what the orcs want and brokering that truce. This is one of the first times when it's not just outright brutal force, but the threat of it that allows the players to say, what is it you want? Let's negotiate. Or maybe the players respond in force, or maybe they run away. Maybe they find a way for the village to escape, for them to escape, and they don't fall to that fear intimidation tactics. It also makes for some great dialogue if you do open that, with the orcs coming at the people with fear and intimidation. That can be fun as well. So remember, when I say you're trying to kill your party with orcs, what I really mean is how do I can create an intense encounter with orcs? Fear, intimidation, followed by brutal, followed by tactics. There you go. Players are dead. So yeah, fear and intimidation. Something that can absolutely use orcs. It's expected. It's a trope that we can embrace. If orcs don't fit that in your campaign, don't do it that way. Remember, use anything the way that it works in your campaign on your table. If these things I say don't work, don't do it that way. But fear and intimidation can be used by anyone that's big and brutish and strong, just like the orcs are predicted. Well, not predicted, but shown, or yeah, that thing. Food for thought. Another thing that we forget about when dealing with orcs is orcs have stereotypically been tribal on plains. That doesn't mean they have to be. In fact, I would use adaptive terrain to give orcs advantage. Very similar to a ranger, orcs that live in a specific terrain will have advantage. Now, that doesn't mean they have advantage on rolls, but it means they know how to use that terrain. Maybe they're using it to flank an individual. Maybe they're using it to cause fear and intimidation by getting sounds to come from all across everywhere, making people feel like they're overwhelmed. Orcs don't necessarily have to be bad, but they can use that terrain, their homeland, their home terrain advantage to their advantage. How would they use the forest to their advantage? How would they use the plains to their advantage? Not necessarily giving them advantage, but what are some creative usage? You know, creating false camps throughout the land. Maybe it looks like there's 3 warbands out there, but in reality there's 1, and then they have large tents planted elsewhere where they've only got a couple orcs keeping smoke flares going, making it look like there's a large encampment at a distance, so that way the people aren't aware. So when the orcs come in, the people thought they had more time, allowing the orcs more leverage to get what they want. Remember, sometimes it's about leverage, sometimes it's about attacking, sometimes it's about a great encounter, sometimes it's about a great storytelling, but when you're going to use orcs to attack, kill, encounter, or drive a campaign, utilize things to their advantage, whether it's terrain, whether it's their aggressive nature, whether it's the big hulking strength for bruteness, or whether it's their cunning tactics. There's a lot of ways you can kill your players when it comes to orcs, but the bottom line is, as long as you're creating engaging encounters and giving the player something, even if they know it's coming, that's okay. It's okay to use a trope. It's okay to use common things to make great encounters. So guys, make sure you like, make sure you subscribe, make sure you comment below and tell us how you've used orcs in your campaign or how a dungeon master has used them against you in the past. I would love to see the variety of usage of orcs from the monster manual, not the playable race, that we've used. And as always, guys, we're talking about the modern day orcs, not the pig-faced orcs back from AD&D. Yep, moving on to the new times. As always, guys, we will see you next time.